All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about political parties and elections within the UK. And this is ground we've already covered, but first of all, just to go over the electoral system for the House of Commons, there are 650 members, and they are elected on a first-past-the-post single-member district system, so one person per district, or one member MP per district, and about 70,000 people are represented by each MP. And as we've discussed before, MPs don't actually have to live in the district they represent, so it leads to a system in which party leaders run in safer seats and new up-and-coming whippersnappers run in less safe seats and kind of work their way up through the party system. So to think about this from sort of an electoral point of view, as a result of first-past-the-post single-member district, or at least the system that they have, I would say the UK has two major political parties, being the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. So we've talked a little bit before about how single-member district first-past-the-post systems tend to create two large parties. That's true in the UK, although they do have kind of an interesting array of regional-based policies and even sort of a stronger third party than we have in the United States, as opposed to kind of three coalitions that exist within Mexico, who uses a mixed system between first-past-the-post and proportional representation for their legislative elections, and many more countries that have a lot more viable political parties that use proportional representation. So two major parties, but a few more kind of interesting parties thrown in to make things fun. And I would also say, as a result of first-past-the-post, they skew the results favorably toward smaller sub-state-based parties. So that's kind of a wonky way of saying kind of the national parties that exist within Scotland, in Northern Ireland, and Wales, like the SNP, the Scottish National Party, Plaid Cymru, the Democratic Unionist Party, Sinn Féin, and a series of other sort of smaller parties that are based in the different parts of the UK that are not England. And oftentimes those parties run and hold majorities or hold strong representation bases in the regional parliaments that exist within Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. So first-past-the-post single-member district, kind of one of the big effects of it is it hurts one particular party called the Liberal Democrats a lot. So they are a third party, kind of the third biggest party percentage-wise within the UK. Frequently run somewhere between 5 and 15, sometimes even I think up to 20%. But they are vastly underrepresented in Parliament because they are kind of a nationwide party that doesn't necessarily have sort of this strong regional appeal. So we'll look at a map, and this is explained a little bit more easily by looking at the election map on the next screen. And kind of as another result of both the parliamentary system and first-past-the-post, I guess, in some respect, although this is really common in proportional representation too, so this is probably more as a result of the parliamentary system. Parties don't often don't achieve clear majorities. So there's often a need for the minority or coalition governments we talked about when we talked about parliaments. And you can see some of what we're talking about here. So the Conservative Party, even though they didn't get a majority of the votes percentage-wise, hold a strong majority within the House of Commons. So over half the seats, I think 364 seats of the 650 belong to the Conservative Party. You can see kind of the way it looks on the map. And then you have the Labour Party, who actually has a pretty close share to the amount of seats kind of compared to the percentage. And then the vast underrepresentation comes in when we're talking about the Liberal Democrats, who essentially have won about 12% throughout the whole country, but that translates to, I think, around 10 or 11 seats, as opposed to the Scottish National Party, who, as you can see, much of their vote from Scotland, not surprisingly, and that ends up kind of resulting in actually a lot more seats, I think 47, 48, something like that, within the House of Commons. So it's interesting to see just how these kind of results, or just how this electoral system creates a system in which the parliamentary seats don't necessarily match up the percentage-wise too much. So if you think about kind of a switch to a proportional representation, and who that would hurt and who that would help, probably would help the Liberal Democrats far more than any other political party. Yeah, All right. So there are some other interesting things to talk about as it relates to elections and other types of elections in the UK. The most important one, and obviously kind of with Brexit in the news um, throughout the past 5 years, Brexit was an example of a referendum. So a referendum is a method of referring a question or a set of questions to the entire electorate directly. So essentially, the Parliament will pass an act or will pass a law that actually sets up a referendum or a public vote on a single issue. So this is used in many countries throughout the world, including some of the AP6 that we talk about. So Russia and Mexico both use referendums or referenda. And then at the individual sort of sub-state level in the United States, lots of states, including Washington State, will frequently have referendums. So if you think about some of the benefits of this, obviously this allows for direct input and participation from citizens. So citizens get sort of a direct vote on a clear issue or on an issue clearly. So this allows for sort of a clear mandate for governance. And I think it tend to these sorts of issues or this kind of referendums tend to be popular. Referenda tend to have high levels of credibility within citizens. Some of the downsides is you elect people to make decisions on your behalf. So there are some people that think referenda sort of take decisions out of the hands of people that are more capable of answering kind of big questions. And then to me, this is an interesting one, and I think you saw a lot of this within Brexit, boil a very complex issue into a simple sort of up or down, yes or no, remain or leave vote. And I think the last one that I would say is sometimes within referendums, public opinion can change. And, citizens might vote one way and then sort of the government is locked into doing something that might not be something that the citizens want 5-10 years down the road. But those are natural downsides and not necessarily even exclusive to referenda necessarily. All right. So, and an interesting side note in the UK and thinking about referenda and how they interact with parliamentary systems. So, after the passage of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which essentially said that there needed to be elections every 5 years, agreement to hold referendums became sort of a way for governing parties or leading parties to put together a coalition um, in kind of an easier way. So the 2010 coalition between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, essentially the Conservatives didn't have enough votes or didn't have enough MPs for a governing majority. So they had to build a coalition government with the third party, the Liberal Democrats. And this was a very big idea or big deal at the time. And essentially, in exchange for that, they had to hold a national referendum on switching to an alternative vote or a different voting system, which they ultimately did and which ultimately failed. So the Liberal Democrats kind of ran this gambit of using their clout to try to push through a new voting system that would give them more equal representation. But then the kind of Conservative Party, the Labour Party, all of the other parties kind of ganged up on that, and the status quo prevailed. And then kind of if you trace Brexit back to its origins, in order to hold together the Conservative Party and kind of the majority of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, agreed to hold a Brexit vote, even while sort of publicly and privately opposing the idea of Brexit. So he sort of pursued this policy that he didn't actually agree with in order to hold the policy, to hold his party together. He sort of thought that, people won't vote for Brexit. And then they did, and he ultimately resigned because he said that if the public voted for something that he publicly didn't support, then he shouldn't be the person to go through with it. So that's the kind of one of the origins of where we are now, or where we've been for the last 5 years in terms of Brexit. So there are kind of two types of referenda within the UK, and you don't necessarily need to know all of these, but you do, I would say, kind of looking for commonalities. The first type are when the UK's parliament sort of has an individual part of the country vote on some issue related to self-determination. So most of the time that looks like Scotland or Northern Ireland or Wales voting specifically on an issue related to devolution, whether or not there should be the creation of a new parliament, to give them more regional representation. Similarly, there was a referendum in 1998 to Londoners on whether or not they should create a position of mayor within London, which they did. And Boris Johnson actually served as the mayor of London about 10 years ago. Actually, whenever the Olympics was, 2012, he was mayor back then. So usually, so this is kind of one type where it is where kind of this Scottish independence is another important one where that was narrowly defeated in 2014. And there might actually, because Scotland was so pro-Remain in Brexit, there might actually be another Scottish independence vote coming in the next 5 or 10 years if the stars align within Parliament. So there's sort of that style of referendum. And then the other one is when all of the UK votes on an important issue. So there's a vote in 1975, sort of similar to Brexit, about remaining or leaving in the European community at the time, which is sort of the predecessor to the EU, not the UK. And then in 2011, they have the alternative vote referendum that was voted down. And then in 2016, obviously, Brexit is an example of a referendum. So those are kind of the important issues that frequently come up as it relates to referenda. And the last thing I'll talk about, there are a few other ways that people vote in the UK. So the UK's Parliament in Wales use first past the post, but there are sort of a few other systems that are used at the local and regional level. So alternative vote and single transferable vote, which are actually pretty common, not common, actually pretty similar in a lot of ways. They can be sort of understood as like sort of ranked choice type voting, where you can rank your choices and there's eliminations and it's complicated, but ultimately its proponents would say that it results in a slightly more accurate version of who the electorate wants than first past the post might. And then before Brexit, and even sort of in a comical way in which the UK still had to vote in EU elections, even as they were leaving the EU, the proportional representation was used for voting into the European Parliament, and I don't think we have to teach that anymore in this class, but I'm not exactly sure. All right, thanks. Bye.